Greetings, my fearless frontliners, my fellow guardians of the galleries. I'm William Young, correctional officer turned correctional apologist, correctional advocate, correctional whatever, and this is my channel. If you're new here, if you're a current, aspiring, retired, or soon to be retiring correctional professional, and you're looking for correctional content that is informative, it's engaging, and it's intended to educate and elevate the profession, then you're in the right place. But if you're looking for a war story for somebody who quit after working for a couple of weeks, well, then this is not that. And if you're one of my longtime subscribers, one of my active commenters, like my guys Joe and Simba John, then welcome back. Thank you for being here. You're the reason that I keep cranking out the content. You and the $7 a month I get from YouTube. All right, today we're going to talk about the trap. We're going to talk about the trap that so many of us fall into, the trap that nobody understands, the trap of thinking that nobody understands what we're going through. And this is something that we wrestle with, that we struggle with this in the profession quite a bit. And this idea, this assumption, right, that nobody understands, it can lead to some pretty bad things. But before we begin, I want to thank the members of the Just Corrections Patreon community for your support. You're the reason that I can keep creating this beautiful, beautiful content. I appreciate you more than you will ever know. I guess that's an assumption because maybe you already know how much I appreciate you, but that's beside the point. If you're listening, if you're watching, and you want to contribute, consider becoming a member. I'll throw a link in the description below, or if you just want to click the little thank you button right there, you could support us that way as well. I appreciate that as well. See, we assume, here's the problem, we assume that because someone doesn't have the exact same experiences that we do, that they can't possibly understand. And you know what? That's true, right? They don't understand. And this is something that we teach our crisis negotiators. Never say that you understand because you don't. You can't, right? Because everyone's experience is unique to them. And there's a lot that goes into all of that, but I'm going to spare you the details. So look, I was a correctional officer. You're a correctional officer, but I still may not understand exactly, right, what you're going through because we're individuals, because our experiences are different, because how I process the job may not be the same way that you do. Does that make sense? So here's what I want to focus on today, okay? People in our lives, the people in our lives don't understand. But more importantly, and maybe more impactfully, they are pushed out of our lives by us because here's the kicker, right? Here's the thing. We assume that they don't understand or know what's going on with us, right? And that's probably true. But they don't understand or know what's going on with us because we don't let them in. We don't communicate with them. We don't share with them what's really going on. And we do that. I've talked to a lot of people. We do that for a couple of idiotic reasons, right? Stupid reasons. The number one, the assumption that they won't get it, right? And then this idea that we're trying to protect them from the underbelly of society, from the crazy stuff that we deal with, right? And please, that's so stupid. That's a trap. That's part of our learned correctional perspective, our trained correctional perspective. It plays into our emotional suppression. Look, this doesn't just apply to relationships at home, although that's usually what my content focuses on. But this happens at the facility too. We shut out coworkers, we shut out our leadership, we shut out administration, we shut out anyone that we think won't get it. But that isolation, that trap, that's dangerous. And that's why we're talking about this. That's what we're going to break down today. We're going to talk about what this trap looks like, how to recognize when you're falling into it, and most importantly, how do you get out of it, right? Because if you don't, when you let yourself believe that nobody understands, when you start to withdraw, then you stop talking. And once you shut down, the burnout isn't far behind. And if you've read my books, if you listened to anything that I wrote, you know that road leads to nowhere good. So let's get into it, right? Let's start with this. What does it look like when we fall into this mindset? It starts small. It starts small, right? You have a rough shift. You come home. You don't want to talk about it because, number one, you've been trained not to talk about it, or because you're not sure how you're even feeling and you're unable to articulate what is even happening, or you don't think the spouse will get it or care, or you don't want to scare them, so you just say that I'm fine. I know that you have done this. I know that you have said this. Go ahead and hit that like button, leave a comment, put I'm fine in the comments. We're going to leave it there because that's where you're going to leave it. You're going to put I'm fine in the comment, and then you're going to leave it. You're not going to use it anymore because I know you're not fine, right? That phrase Those 2 words should be engraved on our graves because we are not fine. Look, I'm guilty of this. I do this all the time. I remember trying to tell stories when I come home about something that I felt proud of, something that I felt like I accomplished, and people, because they don't have the context, people didn't really understand, and so I stopped telling the stories. Let me give you an example. We have an individual, I'll call him Ralph, and Ralph is one of our regulars, and so I'll come home and I'll try to talk about it, and I'll tell the story, and I'll say, hey, look, honey, we had a situation today, and we were dealing with Ralph, and Ralph was naked, and she'll say, oh, she said, what do you mean Ralph was naked? I'll say, well, Ralph was always naked. Never mind, that's not the story. And I'll keep going. I'll try to tell the story, and I'll say, look, so we're up there. Ralph was naked. He flooded his cell. She goes, well, I don't understand why he's naked. I said, baby, that's not the story. Let me tell you the story, right? So Ralph is naked. He flooded his cell. And well, I just don't understand why you let people be babe, hang on a second. Okay, that's not the story, right? So the story is that Ralph's up there, he's flooded his cell, and then I was with Officer Smith, and was Officer Smith the one that you talked about? That's the wrong Officer Smith, but that's not the point of the story. Let me finish the story. By the time I even set the stage, I've answered 50 questions that are unrelated to the even the story that I'm trying to tell. So I just get frustrated. I stop telling the story, right? And it's because sometimes I get tired of setting the stage, right? Or there's this, right? You mention something to a friend, or you tell a story to the friend, and they say, well, maybe you should just quit. In fact, I had someone I know that is aspiring to be in correctional leadership, which they'll probably get there, aspiring to be in correctional leadership. And they asked me this. They started reading my book, and they said, well, if it's so stressful, then why don't you just quit? And I did a video about this, and I'll throw that up in the corner. I'll put it in the description so you can check that out. My rebuttal to that. But look, some of those responses are so stupid, right? So I just stopped talking. I just stopped bringing things up altogether. And at work, it's the same thing, right? You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to talk about what's going on. You don't trust your coworkers, or maybe some of them. Maybe you trust a handful of them, but for the most part, you don't. And even if you did, you probably aren't bearing your soul on shift, right? You're not spilling your deepest, darkest secrets and fears in the break room or in the office, right? So you can't trust them. Nobody at home understands. Leadership is out of touch. Administration doesn't care. So you stop talking. You stop giving feedback. You stop engaging. You stop trying, because what's the point? Nobody understands. They don't understand. Nobody cares, and they don't want to, right? And before you know it, what you're doing is isolating yourself. You're isolated. And here's where it gets dangerous. Here's where the slope starts to get slippery. Once you stop talking, people stop listening. And this is something that I learned in emergency preparedness. This is something that they taught me in my training class. When the inmates stop complaining, when the grievances stop coming, that's when you need to worry, because that's when people feel like nobody's listening. That's when they feel like they have no other choice but to act out, but to create some sort of large scale disturbance. And that's when the real problems start. And the same thing applies to us. When we shut down, that's when the spiral starts. That's when we start to spiral. That's when stress, frustration, resentment, that's when it builds up, and that's when the burnout really starts to grab a hold. Guys, this job is already tough. But when we do this, when we succumb to this, when the isolation builds, it makes things unbearable, right? The second that you convince yourself that you're alone, that nobody understands, that nobody cares, you start to disconnect. You start to build those walls from your family, from your friends, from your coworkers, and that disconnection, it leads to burnout. It's one of the key pieces in the puzzle that is burnout. It leads to mental and emotional exhaustion. And for some, it leads to much, much worse. And look, I've written about this. I've talked about the consequences of burnout, of bottling things up, of letting the job consume you. And it's not just about the work. It's not just about on shift. Guys, this bleeds into every part, every aspect of your life. So if this sounds familiar, if you're catching yourself withdrawing, shutting down, convincing yourself that nobody gets it, then maybe it's time to change the narrative. Do you guys ever feel like this job is changing you, like the weight of the walls are pressing in and you're not necessarily the same person who walked through those gates? Well, you're not imagining things. Corrections, the training, the trauma, the time that we spend inside rewires the way we think, react, and the way we see the world. And that's exactly why I wrote my new book, Train to Change. The unfortunate and unintentional consequences of the correctional curriculum. It's a deep dive into how this career shapes us mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and more important, how we take back control. So whether you're a rookie or a veteran, this book right here, this tool will help you recognize the hidden impacts of the job and give you the tools to push back, stay sharp, and protect your well-being if you're in this profession or you know somebody who is. Grab this book, read this book, use this book as a tool to educate and elevate yourself and the profession. Get your copy of Train to Change today, available on Amazon. I'll throw the link in the description. Start taking control of your story today. And hey, if you've already read it, leave me a review and let me know what you think. Let's start changing the conversation about mental health and corrections, normalizing the conversation in mental health and corrections together. All right, so let's talk about how we get out of this trap, right? We need to break free of this nobody understands mindset. And the first thing that we can do to get out of this is to communicate, even when it's hard, even when it's difficult. And this is where most of us struggle. We assume that people won't understand, so we just don't talk. But here's the thing. Nobody can understand what we don't share, right? Your spouse, your friend, your coworker, they may not get it right away, but they won't have a chance to if you just shut them out. So you need to explain what you're feeling. Help them understand what you're going through. And if they still don't fully get it, at least they know what's going on with you instead of being left in the dark. And that's, listen, that's why I write these books. That's why I've written these books. One of the best compliments that I got, one of the ways that people use the books that I write is that they read them and they say, hey, I can relate to this. This makes sense to me. And then they give these to their partner, to their friends, to their coworkers and say, hey, check this out. This is my story. This is how I feel sometimes. And then their friends and family can read it and then they can say, well, I get it. This makes sense. Guys, we got to talk about it. We have to find ways to communicate. I had an officer reach out to me just a few days shortly after their partner was seriously assaulted. He was stabbed right in front of him and they were struggling a bit. The officer was struggling a bit, working through it, and they were hesitant to talk about what happened at home. And I said, look, you got to talk about it. You got to discuss it. They said, what am I supposed to say? That they were stabbed and there was blood everywhere and we were slipping in it and that I thought I was going to die and my partner was going to die and it was terrible. Well, maybe, right? Maybe you say that. But maybe if you don't feel comfortable with that, then you start with, it's a bad day. How was it today? It was a bad day. And I don't really know if I want to talk about it or how to talk about it. My partner got hurt. You can start with that. You don't have to say, look, my partner got stabbed in the leg and there's blood and it just missed the femoral and this is the craziest job I've ever worked at, because you don't want to scare him, and that's fine. I get that. My partner got hurt and I need a little time to work through this. This is saying that I'm not fine, but I need to work on it. I'm not really sure how to process, how to talk about this, but this is communication, right? This is setting it up. This is avoiding the fight later when the person says, how are you? I'm fine. Well, then you snap and bite their head off later because you're not fine, right? So you set this up and you talk about it however you can, as much as you can, right? And you got to give people a chance. So you got to communicate. You got to give people a chance. And I get it. We're trained not to trust people in this profession, right? Trust is super hard. And after a while, we start believing that nobody outside of the job really supports us. But that's not true. There are people in your life, friends, family, people in your life who care, who want to help. You just have to let them help. Okay, so start small. Open up a little. Let someone in. You don't have to spill everything. You don't have to give everything to everybody. You don't have to trust everybody with everything. But don't assume that just because someone hasn't done the job that they don't care about you. Right? Because they do. They may not know what you're going through, but they know that they love you and want to support you. So don't assume. Check your assumptions at the door. Here's a tough one, guys. Here's we're talking about trusting friends. We're talking about trusting family. We're talking about open up to people, not assuming things about them. But here's a tough one. Check your assumptions about your leadership too. Look, I have my fair share of frustrations with leadership. In some administrations, yeah, they're absolutely out of touch, but not all of them. And sometimes it's not that they don't care, it's that they don't know. Sometimes it is that they don't care, maybe. I don't know. But maybe it's that they don't know. And if we don't speak up, if we don't communicate what's going on at the ground level, this is the same thing at home, right? How are they supposed to fix anything? How are we supposed to gain any ground? And I'm not saying that they'll always listen. Right? But shutting them out completely guarantees that nothing changes. So before you write off your leadership, consider whether the problem is that they won't listen or that we just assume that they won't. Look, someone has to be the bridge. Someone has to shine the light on what it is that we do so that those who never did what we do at least have a point of reference. Does that make sense? Somebody has to be the torchbearer in your facility. Somebody has to be the liaison, the advocate. Somebody has to make sure that information is flowing from the bottom up and the top down. And then we need to recognize the warning signs of isolation. If you're pulling away from people, if you're shutting down, if you're going through the motions but feeling more and more detached, then it's time to do something. Isolation doesn't just happen overnight. It builds up slowly over time. So if you find yourself avoiding conversations, avoiding family time, avoiding coworkers, ask yourself why. And if it's the burnout creeping in, don't ignore it, because if you do, it only gets worse. And my baseline is this, folks. If you feel like maybe you need to talk to somebody or that maybe something is wrong, then maybe something's wrong. Maybe you should talk to somebody. What's the worst that's going to happen? You dig into it and nothing is wrong, then you're out. Absolutely nothing. The beautiful thing about this is that you are in control, right? You have to take control. And in corrections, we don't have control over a lot of things in the job, right? We don't have control over what the inmates do, really. We don't have control over what time we go home. We don't have control over the policies unless you're involved in that process. But what we do have control over is who we choose to engage with and how we choose to respond to those that we engage with. And if the people around you are feeding into your negativity, if they're energy vampires, find a different group. Find a different group of people to hang out with. If your coworkers only complain but never look for situations, don't let them pull you down. Surround yourself with people, both professionally and personally, people who are looking to improve, people who are trying to be better versions of yourself, not just people who want to drag you into their misery, right? And I want you to make an effort here to reconnect. This is a big part of this. I know it's easier said than done, but if you've ever been distant, if you've been shutting people out, right, then take small steps back towards connection. What does that look like? Send a text. Call an old friend. Say yes to dinner plans with your spouse. Make dinner with your spouse, even if you don't feel like talking, right? Sometimes just sitting on the couch, being together is enough. These little efforts can make a huge difference in pulling yourself out of the isolation, out of the trap, out of the pit before it turns into full burnout. I talked about talking to somebody, right? And that's a big part of this. Seek help. Seek support from those who do get it. And this is where things like peer support, EAP, or even having just a trusted coworker to vent to comes in. Sometimes you do need to talk to somebody who understands the job, and that's okay. But don't stop there. Use that as a stepping stone, right, to open up to other areas of your life too, because while correctional officers, they get the job, the people who love you, they care about you, and they want to try to understand. So utilize the resources that are available. Talk to people on shift that get it, that know what the place smells like, but you also have to let the people that love you and support you know what's going on. You have to let them into your life. I did a video not too long ago about the Rocket Man, about being a ghost in your own house, and that's one of the dangers, one of the things that you risk by kind of shutting out your family, the people in your personal life, and opening up just solely to those people in your professional life. You sort of grow a bond, a connection with them, and you lose that bond and connection with your family, and that's not something that you want to do. You have to make this effort, right? The hard truth is nobody's coming to rescue you. Stop waiting for people to come to you. If you're feeling like something's missing, if you're feeling disconnected, if you feel like nobody understands, then you have to take the first step, right? Waiting for someone else to notice, to ask, to reach out, that's a losing game. That may never happen, right? So speak up, reach out, advocate for yourself, let someone else know what's going on with you before you get down to burnout, before you get too far down to that road to burnout. I remember speaking to a gal, and I wrote about this in the Nothing That Never Happened, in the chapter, The Third Teller. I spoke about a woman who was the ex-wife of a correctional officer, and she tried to connect. She tried to reach out to her husband. She tried to get help. She tried to change her very existence to meet him, to help him, to get him the things that he needed, but he did not reach out. He did not reciprocate. He did not want to put the effort in. And in the end, they were unable to salvage the marriage. At the end of the day, you do need to advocate for yourself. You do need to realize that you are your own life preserver. And regardless of what people try to do for you, to help you. If you're not willing to accept that, if you're not at a point where you're ready to accept that, then it's not going to work, right? And the key to this whole thing, the cornerstone, the keystone, right, is that you need to recognize when this is starting to happen, when the job is changing you, because the job, it changes us, it rewires us, it shapes how we think, how we react, how we connect with people outside of work. And if we're not careful, it can turn us into someone that we don't recognize. And that's one of the things that I write about in my book. I got all my books sitting here, my book, Train to Change. How corrections doesn't just affect us while we're on duty. And that's the giant thing. That's one of the major misconceptions that I try to break down, this leave work at work and home at home, right? The job, the environment, the training, the trauma, the time, it just doesn't affect us while we're on duty. It follows us home. It creeps into our relationships, our marriages, our mindset, our mental health. And if you've ever wondered why you feel different, why you're struggling to connect, why you're more withdrawn than you used to be, this job might be the reason. If that sounds familiar, then check out the book. And I'll put a link to the book in the show notes below. Look, falling into the nobody understands mindset is easy, right? And I'm guessing that at some point we're all going to do that, but it's dangerous. It leads people to isolation. It leads people to burnout. It leads people to shut themselves out. But the truth is, you're not alone. You're not alone. There are people out there that are wanting to help you, that are willing to help you. There are resources out there available. You just have to partake in them. All right, guys, thank you for hanging out with us today, for listening, for watching this episode of the podcast. There are new episodes available every day, 4 p.m. Central Time. Set a reminder on your phone so you don't miss it. Set a reminder on your Google Calendar or whatever calendar that you're using so you can remember to jump on so you'll never miss an episode. Sorry, getting a little tongue-tied today. And make sure that you subscribe to the show, follow the show on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you prefer. You can also follow us on Facebook, X, LinkedIn, Instagram. I don't know what all the platforms are. I don't even really know how to use most of them, but leave a comment. Get involved, get engaged, share the show with your friends, your family, your fellow correctional professionals, everybody that you think may be interested. The Just Corrections YouTube channel, Just Corrections podcast. And if you're interested in supporting the show, please consider becoming a member of the Just Corrections Patreon community. There are a couple of different tiers, different options, so I'll put that in the description as well. And don't forget to check out the books, The Nothing That Never Happened and Trained to Change, The Unfortunate and Unintentional Consequences of the Correctional Curriculum. All of those books are available on Amazon. All the links are in the description below. And if you'd like to bring me out to speak or present at one of your events, send me an email at justcorrections.booking@gmail.com. All right, guys, that's all I got. Until next time, be smart, stay safe, stay sane, and we'll talk soon.